Hello and welcome back to Losin It. I'm your host, Stephanie Hunter, and this is where we lose it about Canadian politics and social issues. If you hear a little bit of snorting or chewing in the background, that's my lovely puppy. Got all the kids to sleep, but you can't get the dog to sleep, and we're just gonna have to live with it. Color off. Now we can move on. So, today we're losing it about transgender ideology, and I know this is a sticky subject for a lot of people. I know it's tense, but I myself, thank you for noticing, am a woman, and so I take these issues very seriously from a women's rights perspective, a sex-based rights perspective. And I also am a mother, and I take these issues very seriously from a mother's perspective, from what I want my child to be exposed to and the kind of world I want my child to live in. And as I'm sure you've noticed, because I definitely have, there have been a lot of cases in the news lately involving transgender perpetrators, or should I say, transgender identified perpetrators, because I don't think it's the same thing, and we'll get into that. But I've noticed a couple things when it comes to talking about these cases. There's quite a few people on the right who I've seen sort of fall into the temptation of saying transgender people are mentally ill people do messed up stuff, this is a problem intrinsic to thinking you're transgender, to anything to do with the transgender movement. I don't necessarily think that. There's also what I see a lot of left people fall into the temptation of, which is this has nothing to do with the transgender movement. Every transgender person is a consummate individual. There's nothing going on in the ideology that has led to any of this. And I also don't think that's quite right. In my opinion, if you break down this movement into some categories, it actually does help. And I know this is going to be offensive to some people, but just bear with me. And if you disagree with me, please feel free to put it in the comments, send me an email. I'm happy to engage. But I just think we have to start talking about this. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. This is really an issue that I've been interested in for probably the past decade. And so, I've changed my mind about it before. Maybe I'll change my mind about it again. I used to be a true believer in all of this gender identity stuff. I used to really buy into it. I would have yelled at you drunk at a bar if you told me a male couldn't be a woman. I was really gung ho for it. I was just a bleeding heart liberal. I wanted what was best for everyone. And it came from a really good place, but I never actually thought critical thoughts using my brain about it. And once I left university and I actually started thinking a little bit about it, it became a very uncomfortable part of my life, not just transgender or gender ideology, but a lot of these concepts that have to do with identity politics on the left, because it didn't add up logically, but socially, I was kind of hamstringed into it. Like, it would be very socially disadvantageous for me to admit that I was having doubts. So if asked, I would be like, oh yeah, no problem, trans women are real women. But then in private, I was thinking, oh, this doesn't quite feel right, this doesn't quite add up. And it left me with a lot of cognitive dissonance. It left me feeling very confused, very isolated. And as time went on, COVID hit, I lost a lot of faith in institutions, including universities. And I just realized a lot of the stuff I'd been fed was completely ideological. I would say it was religious. It didn't really have a basis in reality or provable fact. It had a basis in a feeling of being a good person. I sort of fell into this trap of, I am a good person, good people believe this thing, good people believe this thing, therefore I must believe that thing because it must be right because I am a good person. And it's sort of this circular religious thinking that actually leaves no room for critical thinking, because if you're obsessed with being a good person and towing the party line, you can't actually think for yourself. And so if you're caught up in that loop, I would just encourage you, think outside the loop. Maybe you'll come to different conclusions than me, but I would really encourage it. It makes for a much better life. Now I would say I'm a true dissenter on all of this gender ideology stuff. I do not believe that a male can ever be a woman. I do not believe that a female can ever be a man. I don't believe in non-binary. Basically, if you distill it down, I don't believe in this idea of a gendered soul or a gendered essence, that a soul of a person who is female can be trapped in the body of a person who is male. It doesn't make any sense to me. I find it very unscientific. I find it very pseudo-religious, and I can't buy into it. So that's where I sit. I don't believe it, but that doesn't mean I have ill feelings towards people who believe something different. I don't have ill feelings towards transgender people in general. That being said, I do believe that there is a very, very, very small amount of people who are adults, I think that's very important, who are adults, who have extreme gender dysphoria, who see medical transition and social transition as the only route to happiness from where they are right now. I might not agree with that. I personally think that medical transition is very invasive. You're very much disrupting healthy systems within the body, disrupting healthy body parts. I believe that if there's a problem in the mind, like some kind of dysphoria or dysmorphia, that the solution lies in the mind and not in um, altering the healthy body. That I believe that adults have free will and that there are certain decisions that adults can make for themselves, including what I see as quite extreme form of body modification. And my heart really is with people who are experiencing this. I have a lot of sympathy for you. I have a lot of empathy. I myself struggled with body dysmorphia when it came to some disordered eating stuff in my past. I know that it can be really tough, but again, the solution for the problem was in my mind. It was not in starving myself, it was not in over exercising, it was not in purging. It was in coming to terms with the fact with the realities of my body and the fact that I could only change my body so much within the realm of having a healthy one. So, this is our starting point. The first group, the first category is this very small group of adults with gender dysphoria. I've heard some people refer to them as transsexuals. Again, I don't use that term with any malice. I've just heard it used by these people in their own communities. And, these are people who really identify with the opposite sex. Usually they are homosexual and they want to medicalize and change their appearance and change basically their whole ethos to socially blend in as much as possible with the opposite sex. They are not convinced they are the opposite sex necessarily. They just want to blend in and live as if they were. And I have my own opinions about, how this should affect their legal status. I do not believe that males should be entering into female spaces or interacting with female children in a way that is very intimate, in a way that like only we would usually only allow women to. But I don't really have any problem with people socially trying to live out. I think the problem comes with most of the other categories. So there's four other categories I want to explain. They do overlap some. There's lots of people who fall into multiple parts of these categories. So the first of these other categories is the very vulnerable. I'm thinking children, people who suffer from a whole host of other psychiatric conditions, people who see themselves as very low social status, or who have a very hard time forming social bonds, maybe like people who are part of the incel community. This is also, we see a lot of young women with autism, young homosexuals who aren't comfortable with their sexuality yet or aren't able to be out in their home life or school life. And a lot of these people come looking for community, and they also come looking for an explanation for a lot of other things they're struggling with in their life. Whether that's mental health issues, trauma, abuse. And I see this ideology as very detrimental for these people. You see a lot of people detransitioning now, a lot of young women who see themselves as being groomed by adults in their life, being misled by therapists in their life, who see their parents being strong armed into helping them with these medical transitions. And I think it is fair to say that there are some people who are just too vulnerable, who need to have other issues addressed before they could ever qualify for that very small group. And I think it's wise that we begin talking about it, or more people for whom this type of medicalization, this type of ideology is really detrimental for, will continue to be harmed by it. And that is not going to do any good for them. It's not going to do any good for society in general. And it's definitely not going to do any good for that small group of adults with gender dysphoria who are desperate to function as the opposite sex in their own lives. Now, the next group is social climbers. And this sounds harsh, and it is a little bit. I am calling people out. This is your they them celebrities. I see a lot of non-binary people falling into this group. Not all, but a lot. And it's sort of this idea that in a society that really values this oppressor versus oppressed narrative for literally everything, that you can self identify into an oppressed group, which then earns you social cachet. Now, all cards on the table, I would actually put myself in this group because I think allies can also fall into this group a lot, and any member of LGBT. For example, in university, I identified as bisexual, and I was not lying. I dated women, I was attracted to women. I guess if I were to dig deep down, I probably still am, although it seems kind of ridiculous and useless in my life now as a married mother. But, I'm sure it's still there. I identified as bisexual, and that's fine. But I made a much bigger deal of it than needed to be. I made it a much bigger part of my identity, very much at the forefront of my identity when it didn't really need to be. It didn't really have a whole lot to do with the rest of my life. And I did that because other people thought it was cool and it made me feel special. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing now. You know, you find community, people think you're cool, you get social cachet, you sort of get this unearned moral superiority over people. Oh, I'm an ally. Oh, I'm trans identified. I'm more special than you. I know more than you. I'm more oppressed than you. And I just think it's a dirty part of the game. I don't like it. I don't think people are doing themselves any favors either, because a lot of times you're adopting this victim mindset to justify to yourself that you do deserve these sort of oppression points or whatever you want to call it. And again, it's not doing any good for actual adults with gender dysphoria who would like to function as the opposite sex socially, because I think people can see through it, and I don't think it is a very endearing part of the ideology. Now, this next category we're going to talk about is maybe the most contentious, and I see a lot of people putting the last two categories together, which are fetishists and predators. And a lot of people want to put them in the same category, but I don't think they belong in the same category. Yes, there's overlap. There are some fetishists who are also predators. However, I don't think having a fetish makes you a predator. I don't have anything against people with fetishes. I just believe that they should be enacted in your own time with consenting adults away from the public. And there's something called autogynephiles. And a lot of people in the gender ideology movement will tell you that this research is debunked. Is by Dr. Party. He researched men who wanted to identify as women, and he found that there was sort of a homosexual subtype who was really wanting to integrate well with women. And then there was a heterosexual autogynephilic subtype who had a fetish for seeing themselves as women. Sometimes they were predatory, sometimes they weren't, but they wanted to enact out their fetish in public. And the more they acted it out in public, the more intense their sort of fetishistic ideations got. And it's really interesting psychologically. Again, I don't think people are bad people because they have autogynephilia, but I do think it's inappropriate to be acting out your fetish. And I think there's quite a lot of people who hear, if you want to be a woman, you can identify as a woman, you can just be a woman. And I think autogynephiles, whether or not they're consciously hearing this, what they are subconsciously hearing, or maybe consciously hearing, I don't know. If you're an autogynephile, feel free to write in. I would love to hear what you think about this. But I think a lot of what gets through is if you want to live in your fetish full time, all you have to do is say you're a woman, and voila, you have it made. You can live in your fetish full time. And I'm not saying these people are walking around dressed up as women, fully engaged all the time, fully turned on all the time. But I think there is a point where your fetish life sort of starts to merge with your everyday life, and you sort of delude yourself into thinking that, oh, maybe I am a woman, maybe I am meant to be a woman. And this ideology really spurs that on, and I just think it becomes this very unhealthy dynamic. I think women have the right to be in their spaces without fetishists being in our spaces. I think we have the right to, use the women's restroom, use the women's change room, go to a rape crisis center or a prison, worst case scenario, without our spaces being used as grounds for someone else's fetish. And, a lot of women's spaces are also for children, and I don't think children should be exposed to fetish. The idea that a man can be shaving his beard inside a women's locker room or junk out in a women's change room, I mean, these are ridiculous. And if you can't admit that it's ridiculous, I worry for your critical thinking skills. The last category we're going to talk about is predators. Not all transgender people are predators, but there are predators who fall into one of these categories who think they're transgender. And there's also predators who don't believe any of this transgender stuff, but have found loopholes using gender ideology to enact their predatory behavior. So, what do I mean by this? Well, you see some vulnerable people become predators, we see some social climbers become predators, and we definitely see some fetishists also act as predators. However, there's also a group unto themselves who are predatory and who are looking for ways to predate upon women and children, and we have handed them the perfect loophole. Say you're a woman and you can come into women's spaces where we are alone, where we are naked, where we are vulnerable, where you might have a phone, where you have the upper hand physically. Come on in, you're invited. Just say you're a woman. You don't even have to really pretend that you want to be a woman. You just have to say it if you're asked. And you're welcome in the space, and you can do whatever you want. Now, of course, their predatory behaviors are still illegal. You would hope if someone's filming women in the change room or pleasuring themselves in the stall next to you that they would get caught. But we have seen, I think like Trish Hyman, for example, she posted a video approaching her while she was naked in a women's change room in a scenario that made her feel very uncomfortable. And the gym sided with the man. We do see cases of people using these loopholes within this ideology that we've allowed in society. In Canada, we have allowed it to such a great extent. It is self-ID in Canada. You just have to say you're a woman. Come on in. I mean, that is just ridiculous. That is offering absolutely no gatekeeping, absolutely no protection for women, absolutely no protection for children. It is completely unacceptable, in my opinion, and we need to change that. But these are the categories. I think the best way to show how this maybe makes it a little bit easier to talk about the issue is to take some recent cases and sort of break them down into their categories and talk about them. So, for example, in Canada, a couple months ago, we had the Tumbler Ridge shooting. Very tragic. A lot of lives were lost. It was very sad. My heart absolutely goes out to those families. This was a young man who identified as a woman. And if you do a deep dive on this person, you will see that he was definitely very vulnerable. He had a lot of mental health issues. He was abusing drugs. He was on several prescription drugs. And he was mixing with illegal drugs. If you go, onto his Reddit, you'll see that he was struggling with quite a few things. Adults in his life had encouraged him to socially transition at 12. And then by 16, he was on hormone therapy to medically transition. So in those situations, I would definitely classify him as very vulnerable. However, I also think that he was a fetishist. If you look on his Reddit, there's a lot of posts about how do I find women's clothes, things like fishnet stockings and short plaid skirts. And I don't know if you've been around a lot of women like I have, but us girls, we don't generally wear short plaid schoolgirl skirts with fishnet tights to go walk our dog. This is fetish gear. If women wear it, it's usually fetish gear. If men wear it, I would say it's definitely fetish gear. I think this person was an autogynephile. And then obviously they also became a predator. There's cases of the police having to come to their house, of guns being confiscated for violent outbursts, medical or mental health reasons. There's also an incident of a house fire where some people were speculating that maybe his mom was a target in that. And then you move on to the shooting, maybe the most heinous case of mass shooting in recent Canadian history. Is just awful. And so you can see how this person really falls into a couple of the buckets. But none of those buckets are an adult with severe gender dysphoria who wants to live peacefully, socially recognized as the opposite sex, right? So I think we can talk about it in that way without tarring everybody who, the small group of people who maybe actually do benefit from some of this ideology with the same brush. This one's a bit lighter. It made me laugh a little bit, but there's a non-binary man, or I guess a man who identifies as non-binary in Montreal who sued a hair salon through a human rights tribunal for $500 for not offering a non-binary haircut option on their drop-down menu on their online booking. Now, this hair salon booked by the minute, so it was really just like an agenda scheduling tool, longer haircut, shorter haircut. After this person complained, they even, within a few months, had added a non-binary haircut option. But this was not good enough for this non-binary man. He took his complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal and he won $500. And to me, this is just like the perfect case of social climbing. He is so bought into the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. If you look into this person's Facebook, they do a lot of these activist stunts. So I'm not fully convinced that this person wasn't going to hair salon pages or going to local business pages to find ways that they didn't cater to non-binary. But that is just my conjecture. I don't know that for sure. But I do think this person definitely falls into the social climbing category. I think they've used this identity to elevate their social status. I don't know, maybe they're also vulnerable in some way. Maybe there's other things going on, but I would say pretty clearly to me falls into the social climbing category. And then we have a case that didn't happen in Canada. It happened in Australia, but I think it sums up perfectly the predator who uses this as a loophole, who really has nothing to do with the community or other aspects of the ideology. But there's a young man, 23 years old, a med school student, who was brought in by police after a woman complained that he was in the women's bathroom and he'd slid his phone under the barrier between the two stalls to take photos of her. And obviously, this is absolutely disgusting, predatory behavior. They brought him in. They found he had over 100 photos and videos upskirting women. He'd slide the phone under when they pulled their pants down. He would take photos and pictures and videos, and then he would leave, I guess. I don't know. I guess people didn't notice. That's a lot of photos to have without people noticing. Or maybe people did notice and they're too scared to confront him. I don't know. But he got brought in and he was in court, and his lawyer said, when asked, why was he in the women's bathroom to begin with? They said, oh, he was confused about his gender identity. And unfortunately, this man seems to actually have gotten off. I don't think just on the gender identity stuff. I think they had said there was mitigating social factors, like he didn't have strong community supports or something. It was ridiculous. I actually think he's allowed to stay in his med school. So God forbid this man or a man like this becomes your doctor, because we have so little gatekeeping. Can you imagine your gynecologist doing this kind of stuff? Absolutely disgusting. But it's a perfect cut clear example to me of someone who is just using this ideology and this loophole as a cover for their predatory behavior. He is a man, he wants to upskirt women, he goes in the women's bathroom, and then when confronted about it, he says, oh, well, maybe I'm a woman, I'm confused about my gender identity. I'm calling BS. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think you're just a predator. And so those are the categories that I think we can break this ideology down into. You have your truly dysphoric adults, your very vulnerable people, your social climbers, your fetishists, and your predators. And when you break it up using those categories, I think it makes it a lot easier to talk about what is going on with this ideology, without being hateful, without being bigoted, without tarring everybody with the same brush, but just to say, cut and clear, this is what I think is going on. This is where my problems lie. And I'm just being honest. And I think if we can have these conversations, we're going to be in a much better place, because right now people just aren't talking about it. People are yelling at each other. They have very strong opinions, but no one is actually talking. And it's become a huge mess. I think definitely for women in Canada, it's become a huge mess for parents. I'm like, where do I send my kids to school? I don't want teachers talking about this stuff. I'd rather teach it myself to my children. I want to know what they're hearing about. I want to know what kind of ideology they're exposed to. But, I would venture this is also becoming a problem for those gender dysphoric, maybe what you would call transsexual adults, where, they're getting the brunt of all of this BS happening with the ideology and all the hate that's coming from that. And it's not good for anybody. So let's just have the conversation. Let's talk about it. If you agree or disagree with me, please feel free to leave it in the comments or to send me an email at stephislosinit@gmail.com. That's losing it without the G. I also have an Instagram, steph.is.losin.it. Sounds like a mouthful. It's pretty simple. I'm going to put it in the box down below. As always, you can like, share, follow, send to a friend, press the notification button so you don't miss an episode. And until next time, goodbye.